Hello and welcome to a special breaking news edition of the Kilowatt Half Hour. We've not done one of these before, but of course we've had big news concerning electric vehicles in the budget today from the Chancellor. Of course, it was all leaked earlier this morning as well. So we just thought we'd bring you a special edition of the programme based on that.
Yeah, and we know that this is going to be an enormous issue, not just for EV drivers, but for anybody who is thinking about switching to electric. Of course, there's been all these headlines over the past few weeks about what is the Chancellor going to do. Of course, she's finally come out and said what she's going to do. So we're wondering whether it has helped your decision to buy an electric car or it's put you off.
Yeah, as always, let us know what your thoughts are on EVs and the budget in the comments below. If you've got any more questions about all of this, or you just want to have a rant, because I think there might be some rants out there, you can also email us at podcast@electrifying.com. So shall I just go through, Batch, because this is completely unplanned. It's a bit chaotic, and apologies, it's not the right time of day to be recording a podcast because I'm dark and you're a bit orange. So
I know.
there you go.
I've not been on holiday. It's due to the time of day. Yes.
Okay. So listen, the top lines are that overall, we've got a pay per mile tax coming in for electric and hybrid vehicles. We've got £1.3 billion in EV discounts. Of course, that comes with a lot of caps, as we're going to be discussing. We've got £200 million going into charging. There are changes to the banding around the luxury car tax, so-called luxury car tax. Also, some pretty big changes coming through to the Motability scheme. So I think they're the main top lines for us, aren't they? Should we take this one by one, Batch? What do you reckon?
Yeah, let's do that. You start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, shall I kick off then with the biggest and probably, the most contentious for sure, which is the pay per mile tax changes. Look, I think we've all known that this was coming. It's been, honestly, this budget has been as leaky as the leakiest sieve you can imagine, because everything's been leaked, hasn't it? So we've known this was coming, and we've heard today that it is. We were told ahead of time that there would be a consultation on the new pay per mile EV tax. However, this was presented today as pretty much a done deal. So the Office for Budget Responsibility estimates the move will bring in £1.1 billion when it's introduced in April 2028. And what we know so far is it's going to cost an extra £3 per mile for EVs, 1.5p per mile for plug-in hybrids, which will be payable at the same time as your vehicle excise duty. And that will still apply to EVs as well. So this is a kind of VED plus for EV drivers. The government has said that the new charge will only apply to cars. It's not going to apply to electric vans, lorries, motorcycles, coaches, or buses. So, thoughts on that, Batch? Why don't you kick off with that, and then I'll have a rant as well.
Well, you're right. I mean, it has been the leakiest ship, really, hasn't it? And it's got a lot of people, rightly so, very hot under the collar for the last few weeks. But effectively, this has been a topic which the industry has been talking about for years. There's this impending question of how do you fund zero emission cars, and there needs to be a difference between petrol and EV. So it's been a long time coming, but of course it leaked quite a few weeks ago, and I mean it was initially mooted at 9 pence per mile, wasn't it? Which again is quite a big number. It's actually cheaper. I think that is classic kind of government spin, isn't it? Start off with the big figure and then actually release it. When you actually come to release it, it's a lower figure. Hopefully in the hope that people are going to be happier about it. I'm not entirely sure even at 3p per mile people are going to be particularly happy about this. I think the big surprise for me actually was that this includes plug-in hybrids. I know it's cheaper, it's 1.5p compared to 3p, but again it feels like no matter what you do, whether you go full EV, you go the right direction and buy an EV, or you start that slow transition, you start with a plug-in hybrid to see whether electric works for you, and then with the intention to go into an EV later on, you're going to be clobbered as well. So it feels like anybody who wants to have some form of electric car are going to be clobbered by the Chancellor.
I think for me, it's really problematic for a few reasons. I think, first of all, it's too soon in the transition.
Yeah.
We've got big ZEV mandate targets to hit, which are set for manufacturers. By 2030, 80% of their overall sales will need to be electric, although there's a few mechanisms that help them reduce that slightly in over the next few years, which enable them to count the overall emissions of their fleet in that target. But I think, for me, it's what message this gives off. Is the government serious about the EV transition? Because it quite frankly doesn't seem to be. And I think the challenge for me with pay per mile is you've got a lot of people who switch to an EV in good faith, and we're actually paying a fair bit more in upfront costs. And we've got guides and explainers and videos about this thing called total cost of ownership, which the government itself has been very keen to talk up. And that's, of course, your overall running costs of an EV are less, and that more than compensates for the fact that you may well have paid more in upfront costs. Now, we know we're getting there a bit more with price parity. Some models, of course, and depending on whether you need bigger batteries, still are more expensive, but it is definitely getting there. But you've got people who switched when we weren't there. And I think that is incredibly unfair to them, who switched in good faith based on these lower running costs. The other thing that I find problematic with this pay per mile tax is that it's hitting those people who can't charge at home. Now, we know that if you can't charge at home, it's already more expensive to run an electric vehicle, because you're not taking advantage of all these brilliant overnight tariffs that those of us who are fortunate enough to have home charging can. So if you're not able to take advantage of that, then you're already paying, in some cases, more per mile to run an EV than you are a petrol car. And now you're being clobbered for an extra 3p a mile. So I'm really I'm really angry actually about that, and I'm really angry that people who can't charge at home are not being exempt from this charge. And I think that's something that we're going to raise with the government, and we will push to make sure that this doesn't come in to hit those people who are already having to pay more for their energy. If you are one of those people, we'd love to know what you think about this pay per mile charge. I think in theory it's not a bad idea down the line, but I think it's too soon.
Oh, absolutely. But on the subject of fairer charging between public charging and home charging, whether that is cutting the VAT on public charging or other ways of leveling the playing field, this has been called for a couple of years now, and particularly so this year. Trade bodies like the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Trades, the SMT, manufacturers have been calling for it. And it's, on the face of it, it seemed to be a very easy way of helping people be convinced that electric is the right choice to go with. And the government seems to have been they've decided to be blinkered on this and put their fingers in their ears. And instead they've been finding ways of pumping up the electric car grant, which we'll come on to in a minute, thinking that's a better way of doing it. I'm with you. I think it's all about messaging, all of this. And today was a bad day for EV messaging. If there'd been ways of cutting VAT or leveling the playing field when it comes to car charging, that would have sent a far stronger message.
It would. And I just think there's two more points on this before I want you to chat us through what we know about the electric car grant. One is that the Office for Budget Responsibility published all this online a couple of hours before the government did, which we'll all have known, seen in the news today. And I was looking through this earlier, and on page 75 of the OBR report, which shows you just how exciting my life is and the fact that I need to get out more, are some figures that the OBR have done on what the impact of this pay per mile is going to have. And it is absolutely going to bring in a large amount of money. They've got all the estimates around that. They expect it will raise 1.1 billion in the 2028 to 29 financial year, rising to 1.9 billion in 2030 to 2031. However, the caveat there is, it says, as an overall result of this measure, we estimate there will be around 440,000 fewer electric vehicle car sales across the forecast period in relative to the pre-measures forecast. 130,000 of this will be offset by the expected increase in sales due to other budget measures. And those are things like the grant that we're going to come on to, and some changes around the luxury car tax. But if you take that off, this is over 300,000 fewer electric car sales will be made. So what's the government trying to do with this? Is it trying to help us transition to a low carbon future? And does it want car makers to hit those Z mandate targets? Or is it prepared to chuck all that away in, which is what it's looking like, in favour of getting some short-term revenue in the bank? So I've got a big concern about that. And the only other thing I'm going to say on this is fuel duty. Fuel duty frozen for what, 10th, 11th year in a run?
Yeah.
The elephant in the room that no government wants to address.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they're taking with one hand, and then they're going to give to us with the other batch, aren't they? One foot on the brake, the other on the accelerator.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the government would like to say that they're putting their foot down harder on the accelerator now because, again, it was rumoured the back end of last week that it was rumoured that the electric car grant was going to be turbocharged or supercharged or more electrons or whatever simile you want to say. But so the electric car grant, as we all know, came in force in July. It was a £650 million scheme. It was absolutely enormous. I mean, this was, it made huge headlines. I remember when we were talking about it, this is the policy that's really going to drive people into EVs. And then, of course, we saw the absolute horror of how it was rolled out, initially just with 4 Citroens, and trying to get the government to actually reveal or confirm what cars were part of the ECG. Was like getting blood out of a stone, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And at this current moment in time, only 4 vehicles get this. The top range £3,750 saving. But the government think this is a great policy, so they've decided to chuck another 1.3 billion into the pot to keep this scheme going. Now, Ginny, I don't know if you found this surprising. So when the government announces they've added some details on how the ECG's gone so far, and they say 35,000 people have made the switch to EVs, which I don't think is enough, really. If you think about the ZEV mandate targets, I don't think 35,000 drivers is enough. But then on the other hand, there's only around 40 cars that get the ECG, isn't there? So it's kind of, I don't know whether that's a good number or a bad number, and I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, the brilliant New Automotive, who are a think tank who do a lot of analysis of sales figure and data, and they actually, we get the monthly sales figures. They're very good at predicting those. They have come out with a piece of work that I was reading earlier this week that says that they don't think you can really attribute any of that 35,000 to the grant alone. You can't say that these are people who wouldn't have switched who are making the switch. So that in itself is problematic. I think the other thing for me is that it's sort of skewing the market in a way. You look at the Ford Puma Jenny. It's sold out. Okay, that car only went on sale in the spring. You can't get one now. They're bringing forward next year's build allocations. Now, that was the first car to qualify for the full £3,750 grant. It's an all right car. It's fairly decent. It's not the best electric car, but there is no doubt that they experienced a huge sales bump because of the taxpayer. And so it's not really helping car buys, is it? It's helping car makers.
Yeah.
It's basically a backhanded grant to car makers who build cars in the UK. That's fine, but be honest about that. Please don't try and wrap this up in that you're helping EV drivers, because if you were, you'd have something that was a little more inclusive.
You would, yeah.
I mean, so we've obviously seen the Nissan Leaf added to that as well in the last week. And I just think I'd like to see some more cars eligible for that full amount, and perhaps some other brands as well. It's pretty limiting, isn't it?
It is pretty limiting, and particularly when you are trying to convince people to go electric. And of course, from a manufacturer perspective, they've got to sell a certain number of cars this year. The pool needs to be widened, and it's all very worthy, and it's a great idea. The government have done the electric car grant. It's based on how green the factory production is, but let's face it, when you're trying to convince lots and lots of people to go electric, people aren't really worried about how green the car factory is, are they? Let's let's be honest.
The other thing to be fair, Batch, is it's not actually based on how green the factory is. It's based on the manufacturing emissions of the country which the battery is produced into.
Yeah.
So that means that so the Mini Electric, for example, is built in a factory that completely runs on renewable energy. Yet they're not eligible for the grant.
No,
because it's built in China.
Yeah.
Okay. And it also means that lots of car makers are moving to a European supply chain, and they're sourcing batteries from Poland, which is now the second largest battery manufacturer outside China. But they're transitioning their grid. So any car makers who are trying to do the right thing and bringing the supply chain to Europe, again, they're not eligible because the battery is produced in Poland, which hasn't got a green grid. There are some weird things with this. I want to move on, but just before I do, so Sam, one of our news head of all our news stories, has been in a briefing with the Treasury about some of the announcements today. So one of the questions we've had about the paper mile is how is it going to be managed? And obviously, if your car's over 3 years old, we've been told that that's going to be logged when you go take it for an MOT. But of course, new cars, you don't need an MOT. Hot off the press, Batch, what do you think of this? The new news is that the current proposal is that new electric vehicles, which of course don't have an MOT until they're 3 years old, will have to visit an MOT centre annually to have their mileage verified. Now, the MOT centres can't cope with the amount of MOTs needed at the moment because we have a shortage of trained mechanics in the UK. Yeah. So that's what they're proposing. Guys, our new EVs, we're going to have to pop down to the MOT centre to get your mileage checked once a year. Let us know what you think of that in the comments below.
Well, just on that, it's not just a shortage of technicians to do MOTs. There is still, and it sounds unbelievable, but it's true, there is still a COVID backlog at MOT test stations. The MOT test stations have taken a long time to get back up to speed. And if you're now having to say to people, you've got to take your EV every single year to have your mileage verified, it's going to clog up the system. It really is.
Okay, I think we need to move on from that, and I can't wait to read what you all think in the comments. So, Batch, what's the next one? Should I just do quickly? Vehicle excise duty. Okay, luxury car tax, as it's been called, which was this tax that was brought in for luxury vehicles, but because the upfront costs of many EVs are more, particularly if you need a bigger car or you need a car with a bigger battery, you ended up with cars from, VW and Kia that were family cars being pulled into paying this tax because the banding was set at £40,000. They're moving the threshold to £50,000. So that means that if you buy a new car that's priced higher than that, you'll have to pay £425 a year extra. But I do think that makes a bit more sense. What do you make of that one?
Really big surprise today. It was nice to have a few surprises in the budget. Actually,
yes.
So many leaks.
Yes.
It really, as I was sitting at my computer writing the story, I was like, oh gosh, that's really quite different actually. It is a very welcome move, like you say. I mean, but it does kind of undermine how ridiculous the past few months have been. The number of manufacturers have been tweaking this and tweaking that, introducing lower trim levels to get their cars below that £40,000 threshold.
Yeah.
Is now much higher, and the number of cars that are going to now be eligible because of this have absolutely rocketed. I mean, I was looking at some figures earlier on, and 38% of new EVs have got RRPs between £40,000 and £50,000. So this really does open up the pool to a far larger number of cars. And of course, this is one of the moves by the government which will help people switch to electric, because if you're able to say then they don't have to pay extra road tax because it's not their fault that their car goes over a threshold, is it? It's
no,
so yes,
absolutely.
Very welcome move.
Yeah, it is. But although, as the OBR has pointed out, any increases that come because of this are being wiped out by paper mile. So, so there is that too. Just quickly want to talk about the 200 million going into charging infrastructure. Again, really welcome. But I do think that backing all this needs to be a bit more of a plan and support for local councils. So we've been running some numbers recently based on government figures. And I've discovered that, there's a real postcode lottery around the country when it comes to local charging. Some
Yeah.
councils are just really good at it. I sat on a panel with a brilliant woman who heads up the charging infrastructure rollouts for Coventry, and she's doing a great job. They've got 750 chargers per 100,000 people in Coventry.
Mm.
And yet you've got big northern cities like Manchester and Leeds and Liverpool and Sheffield and Newcastle. They all sit below 100 chargers per 100,000 people.
Yeah.
So we know that councils have got more expertise. So I think while that is welcome, we do need a bit more expertise and support for councils to get the right charging in at the right place, and also having talking to lots of charging providers. There's also a real need, I think, for planning restrictions. There's issues with track planning, there's issues with grid connections. So I think that's welcome, but we definitely need a bit more support behind the scenes. I was chatting to John Lewis, not the John Lewis, the huge department store. He's the CEO of a company called Chargy, and they've done a lot of work with Coventry. And he just said, the funding matters, but it doesn't fix the bottlenecks. And, you've got to get things like planning and grid capacity in there as well.
You have. And
right. And what else? Go on. Sorry,
I'll just on that point also, not only is it a postcode lottery, but a lot of local councils, they've been given government money to invest in these gully chargers, the gullies in the pavement, to allow people to charge up outside their house in terraced housing, for example, because they can't have a home charger. Some councils, like Oxfordshire, have really jumped on this. They've used the government cash, they're trialing it, whereas other councils have really backed away from it. And as we know, on-street charging for people who don't have home chargers is a massive problem we've got to confront.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. Okay, what else have we quickly got to rattle through? Motability changes. They're interesting. Yeah, the government's now deciding what a luxury car brand is.
Well, yes, and I mean the thing that really made my sort of mouth drop during the Chancellor's speech was she actually said, Motability, it's supposed to be helping people with mobility problems. We shouldn't be funding Mercedes-Benz lifestyles. And she actually name checks Mercedes-Benz, which I thought was quite a very bold thing to say. I've also been I've been talking to premium manufacturers over the past 24 hours, and all of this was a massive surprise. They weren't consulted, they weren't told ahead that this was going to happen. So all of a sudden, a lot of these premium brands they've realized, gosh, we're not going to be selling so many cars over the next few years. Also, interestingly, like you just said, Ginny, the government has decided which brands are premium. So it's Audi, Mercedes, Alfa Romeo, for example, but no Volvo, for example. So it's a bit of a very interesting thing, that.
Again, I just do not understand why they didn't just put a threshold, a slightly higher threshold maybe for EVs, and then a threshold, and then people can decide what they want. I can completely get, Motability scheme costs taxpayers a lot of money, and I think it probably does need some revisions to the scheme. But I just, again, like you, bemused. And I think this probably sums up what I feel about the government's attitude towards the EV transition and the driver is it's a bit shambolic, if I'm honest. It really is. It's the mixed messaging is incredible. There you go. There's some money and some funding. Oh, but no, then we're going to charge you with that. It just feels like they're not planning properly. They're just making policy up as they go along.
Oh. Yeah. And why is it wrong that somebody who's got mobility problems may aspire to wanting a BMW or a Mercedes? I don't think it's for the government to decide which brands are acceptable for people with mobility problems. I mean, we're almost going back to the days of having those tiny little mobility scooters, those little turquoise little cars.
I do. Awful, yeah.
And, we've moved a long way from that, but now the government seem to be keen on dictating which car brands are acceptable for Motability users, which I think is wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we've got to point out that, the whole costs of those cars aren't funded. What happens is, though, if you want to upgrade, you pay a top up on top of your basic level. Yeah. So, I agree. I'd be really interested to know what you think about all of that. And if you are a Motability user, you're a user of the scheme, do let us know in the comments below. Should we go and lie down in a darkened room?
I think so. Today's been quite a stressful day. I've got quite angry. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm sure there's some of you getting angry out there. Maybe some of you are happy as well. Let us know. You can email us podcast@electrifying.com. You can drop a comment in the comments below. We'll pick them up when we come back with a normal podcast next week. In the meantime, thanks for joining us.
Thank
Happy
you.
Budget Day.